Towards the end of my seminary career, as I was getting ready to step into ministry, I was introduced to the work of Murray Bowen, a psychologist who lived in the Washington, D.C. era many, many decades ago, and what he called his family systems theory. And the family systems theory basically says that patterns of relationships replicate from generation to generation. And if you can understand your family story and how you relate to others within those family patterns, you can understand a lot about yourself and how you operate in the world and why you function the way that you do, because your family of origin has a lot of impact on who you are as a person. And working with family systems theory means that you spend a lot of time delving into your family tree. And so I have been handing over hundreds and hundreds of dollars over the last decade to Ancestry.com as I do some of this work. And you can see some of it here. Wow, that's really fuzzy. Okay. This is just a piece of my family tree that I've been working on over the year. This is my mother's side of the family. Right there, Anthony Quattrello. That is my maternal grandfather. He died 6 years before I was born. He was somebody I never knew. And so there's a gap in the relationship, at least on the personal level for me, although I certainly hear stories about him from my mother all the time. And I've been able to trace back to his parents, and that's it. It's a dead-end trail, and it has been for years, because the record keeping on the Italian side of things isn't so good. I can trace my Irish and my Scottish ancestry back to like the 1600s, 1500s, but even then, those are just names without any stories attached to them. But here, it's just a mystery, a big hole. I know names and a few stories, and then nothing. Like, we don't even know for sure where in Italy my family emigrated from. We have some ideas, but we can't even track the records down. And it's frustrating to have those holes existing in your story. You know somewhere deep in your core that the people who came before you have a great deal to do with who you are today and why you are the way you are. And you want to know what they did and who they were, so you can, lay some blame at their feet, maybe, depending on how you're feeling about yourself, or thank them. But there's nothing there, and it's frustrating to have this kind of mystery in your own self and the story of who you are, which is probably why this movie spoke to me so much when it came out a couple of years ago. Coco was Pixar's release in 2017 now, I think. Yes, and it's the story of a young boy named Miguel. Not Coco. Coco is his grandmother, who barely appears in the movie, but who looms over it as this great presence. And Miguel has a mystery of his own that he is trying to solve about his family. See, his family hates music. And the story they tell is that Miguel's great-grandfather was a good-for-nothing cad who was a famous musician and left the family to go be famous and never came back again. And so upset was his great-grandmother that she banned music from their lives, and that persisted from generation to generation in this multi-generational household. No music. Musicians are thrown out into the streets. They are avoided at all costs. But Miguel loves music, has this inborn talent, and he has to hide it. There is Miguel with his grandmother, Coco. Coco, who does not speak hardly at all through the movie. Coco, who has been a little traumatized by the family history. Now, through the course of the movie, Miguel makes the inference that his great-grandfather is truly Ernesto de la Cruz, star of stage and screen, famous musician, loved by millions across Mexico. because he sees a picture, the face torn out. There's not even a picture of his great-grandfather to look back to. But that faceless picture is carrying Ernesto's guitar. So obviously Ernesto is that great-grandfather who ran away from home, and obviously that is where Miguel's latent musical talent is coming from. And so in order to rebuild memory for himself, to tell him the story he needs to tell himself, to know who he is, he builds this altar to Ernesto. Something akin to the ofrenda of the Day of the Dead in Mexico, set up to remember who he is, to tell this story of a piece of his life that is missing from the rest of his family history. This is an important step for Miguel to take, because as human beings, we need to take some time and some intentionality to remember on purpose who we are and where we come from. We go about our day-to-day lives, and it's easy to forget a lot of the details of the wholeness of our story, of our family story, of our human story. In the world of Coco, on the Day of the Dead, because people are remembered after they are gone and their pictures are placed on the ofrenda altars, the dead can cross over the Marigold Bridge and come and spend some time with their families, look over them, see how they're doing, check in on the progress of the family story, give a little guidance. And in this way, Miguel, by building his ofrenda to Ernesto de la Cruz, is leaving a door open to a piece of his story, or what he assumes is a piece of his story. But why remember? Why stay connected to others? It's probably easier to answer that question by delving into what it is that happens if we forget. What happens when we forget those who come before? Through Hollywood circumstances, Miguel ends up in the land of the dead on the Day of the Dead, though he has not died himself. It's a little convoluted. And he has to get a blessing from a member of the family in order to return back to the land of the living before he becomes a permanent resident. And in the process of searching for family to bless him, Miguel meets a man named Hector. Hector is not able to cross over the Marigold Bridge on the Day of the Dead because no one has placed his picture upon an altar. No one has remembered him. And very slowly as the movie progresses, we see Hector is starting to fade away in the land of the dead as well. When he is forgotten, he is dead for good. Heck of a metaphor. But for those of us in the Unitarian Universalist Church who believe that we have many different beliefs about life after death, and the only thing we know for certain is that there is love after death, this sense of memory being the thing we hold on to is so very important. Memory is how we carry people into the next life with us. It is how they live on for certain. And if we do not remember, then we kill the memory. At the very least, people become forgotten. And when they are forgotten, we lose our stories. We lose our sense of who we are. A sense of self-understanding dissipates as the memories of those who have come before us fade. And the more we lean into that, the more we start to make the mistake that we are somehow self-generated people, that we got here all on our own, that we did all the hard work ourselves. We see that in sharp relief today as we watch so many of us who are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of immigrants in this country forget that we came from immigrants, believe that we are native born, and entitled to the land that we live on, forgetting who has come before, forgetting who we have supplanted to be where we are, forgetting what was sacrificed on our behalf so that we could be here today. In the book of Deuteronomy, God reminds the Israelites that they are living in cities on foundations they did not build and drinking from wells that they did not dig. And remember that there were people here before they arrived in the land that was promised to them. We are all of us drinking from wells we did not dig every day. And if we forget where we come from, we have no chance to celebrate the people who made it possible to put us where we are. And we have no chance to heal the things that have gone wrong in the generations past. And that's a big part of Miguel's story and Coco as well. There's this concept of a thing that exists called generational trauma. Coco, in the movie Coco, Miguel himself opens the movie by saying he feels like he is being punished for something that somebody else did wrong years ago. Being punished for loving music in ways that his family won't allow. He is paying the price for somebody else's mistake. And certainly, family systems theory would let that play out a bit, that we do repeat patterns from generation to generation, both in terms of the healthy ways in which we engage in relationships and also the unhealthy ways in which we engage in relationships. Often family secrets, even if we forget what those secrets are, still put a lot of static and tension in the family system. If we don't tell the stories, we don't know what the secrets are to try to fix them. If we don't tell the stories, we can't have a chance to break the unhealthy patterns. And even beyond just the psychological work of the family system, there is some sense that this generation to generation trauma is a genetic thing as well. There was a 2015 study where they studied the DNA of Holocaust survivors and their children and their grandchildren, discovering that there are chemical markers within certain genes of survivors that have carried from survivors to their children and beyond. Now, it's a very slim study. They didn't study a lot of people. There's a lot of work still to be done, and the jury is still out, but there's a lot to indicate that the trauma we suffer passes on from child to grandchild and on and on. And if we don't tell those stories, if we don't tell where that hurt comes from, there's no chance to heal the hurt that carries on beyond us. And that's really the story of what's going on in the movie Coco, too. There's a story that is not being told. There's part of a story being told. Somebody did something bad, and now we don't like music, but who did the bad thing has been hidden. The pictures have been erased from memory until, as it turns out, and the movie goes on, and I'm sorry, it's been out for 2 years, I'm going to spoil it for you now. It turns out Hector, and not Ernesto de la Cruz, is the great-grandfather in question. And he didn't leave because he was in search of fame and fortune and hated his family. He left because he was killed out of jealousy for his talent. And in the process of getting back to the land of the living, Miguel is able to reunite Hector with his great-grandmother, bring some reconciliation about in the land of the dead and into the land of the living as well as the story is finished. And Coco speaks some of her only lines of the movie as Miguel shows the picture of Hector. And Coco recognizes Papa. And the tension is released. Where are we? And everything's happy again. There they are. Living and the dead, all happy as one family. I need to get a monitor over there one of these days. There is a concept in many earth-based religions and a lot of shamanic traditions around the idea of ancestral healing, around the idea that even though the generations before us have passed, we can heal our ancestors. That the work we do now can fix what went wrong in the past. That we can make right what was set wrong. So why do we do the work of memory? Why do we work so hard to remember, to tell those stories, to learn them? At the very least, it is so that we can know ourselves in wholeness, know the wholeness of who we are and where we come from in our family setting, to have a chance to heal what went wrong, to uncover those secrets that push so much static through our family relationships. And we engage in this work of memory so that we who believe in that vast interdependent web of those amongst us living now, but those who will come after us and those who have come before, we get to see more and more of what that web looks like, get a wholer picture of just how deeply we are connected, not just here and now, but to our past and to what comes next. We engage in this work of memory so that we can maintain that love after death that we are so certain of. And we do it so we can celebrate who we are because of who they were. And that memory takes intentionality. In the movie Coco and in the Mexican culture, that comes about on the Day of the Dead with those altars, the ofrenda, multi-tiered tables that tell the story of loved ones' lives from their earthly life on up to the next life, from the earthly to the spiritual, rising up those tiers. In the world of the movie Coco, sometimes that translates into actual travel back and forth between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And wouldn't that be great if we could do that occasionally and say hi to some of the ancestors, get some questions answered. Why did you make me the way I am? But we can't do that, maybe. We have other ways of going about living into that work of memory with our ancestors. We keep photo albums and family documents. That has become my particular role in my family of origin now. As I've started doing this family tree work, it means what I have is piles and piles of pictures and documents I still haven't gone through yet, sitting in my home office. We do the work of our family trees, at least learning the names if we can't get all the stories. We mark the places where they have their final rest in graveyards and gravestones. And sometimes we set up memorials to the people who are important to us in our churches. It was one of my sincerest wishes when we built the new building that perhaps we could create a columbarium wall out on the grounds, a wall where we can inter ashes if people so choose, or at least put up the names of our members and our friends who have passed, who have meant so much to us. And unfortunately, that was just not in the offing. We couldn't pull that together. But we have done different sorts of memorials to our members and our friends here over the years. For years, we had a row of flowering hawthorn trees over on the edge of the parking lot that were planted in memory of loved ones here who had passed. And during the time of building, we weren't able to hang on to all of those. There are still 2 of them in that little border ground between this side of the parking lot and the Mason side of the parking lot. So we still have a couple of those trees. But when we set up the gardens outside the fellowship hall, we did that with the intent for that to be a memorial to our friends and our loved ones here in the church, especially that little circle in the middle there with the benches, a place to go sit and contemplate, sit amongst the beautiful flowering plants and remember those who have come before who meant so much to us. But it's important to remember the names of those people, to know who it is we are memorializing, who we are dedicating those grounds to in that beautiful space. And so finally, we have pulled our stuff together here, and we'll begin to do that. Within the next year, we'll be putting up a perpetual plaque on the inside of the fellowship hall, because getting all-weather plaques is not an easy process. And we'll be setting that up to mark with little plaques the names of those here, members and friends of the church who have passed, who we want to remember, and we want to dedicate that garden to. And if there's someone who is a part of the church who you particularly want to remember and whose name you want to see memorialized for that garden and on that plaque, we're going to start giving you a chance to set that up. Kathy Gursky is organizing a bunch of this for us. And we are looking to collect the names of those here from the congregation who you would like to memorialize and would like to sponsor on the plaque. There's a small cost associated with this. We're looking for $20 a name just to cover the cost of the engravings. But hopefully before this year is out, we will be able to set that up and do a true dedication of the memorial space for our friends and loved ones here, as well as mark the names of those who originally subscribed to the trees out by the 2 trees that remain, so that we have just a small means of remembering who we are as a community here, who we are as a human family in this space. Because that web that binds us together isn't just limited to our family of origin. We are, all of us, carrying pieces of one another every day, every Sunday we meet, every meeting we gather for, every small group we convene in, every little thing we share in this space. We are giving pieces of ourselves to one another and carrying the pieces we have been given. We are who we are because of how we are bound together. And that's deserving of some memory as well. That is deserving of some storytelling. And so I invite you to take part in building our own tree of memory here as we tell the story of who we are and who we've become because of who has come before. May it be so.